tree right there is the same tree right there. It's been painful, it's been expensive, but we've done well. Now, I mentioned that we use a lot of these PPO inhibitors, the famicifans and so forth, in a lot of different crops. And now we're using a lot of glufosinate in cotton in particular. And the point of it is, we don't see anything new coming. Now the 2,4-D dicamba tolerance, another story. But basically nothing new is coming. And so now we're depending very heavily on the PPO inhibitors and the glufosinate. And the question is, how much longer are we going to go before we have a problem there? We have really made a big shift over to using glufosinate to take care of the pigweed, and we've been trying our best to encourage growers, don't screw this thing up. And so we talk about never using glufosinate by itself. We're always talking about residuals in the system. We're talking about holding it down to 2 shots per year. We're talking about being very timely. If you're going to kill palmer with glufosinate, it has to be small. We talk about the full rate, proper application. Here's one that you probably have not heard about. The time of day putting out glufosinate is critical. Show you a picture here. This was when it went on in the mornings. 1 hour before sunrise, no control. At sunrise, not much control. A half hour after, beginning to get better. Hour, still there. 2 hours, she's clean. Afternoons. 1 hour after sunset, poor control. Half hour before, not great. An hour or more ahead of sunset, I'm still getting control. So when y'all start...
You think it'd be just the opposite, you know? Isn't it related to the stomata being open and stuff like that? It's not...
Obviously, if you got sunlight and you're not under drought stress, the stomata will probably open. But we don't think that's the case. Obviously, with some things like velvet leaf, the leaves fold down at night, not much of an issue here. Culpepper had a student did a bunch of labeled work and trying to figure out, and never could really figure out exactly what's going on. But we don't think it's just a matter of stomata being open. But it's night and day. It's shocking.
Yeah.
Is paraquat similar?
You know, I don't know. Paraquat may be the opposite. There's actually some research going on in various places now looking at the effect of time of day with other products, because don't know. But I said paraquat could be the opposite. The thing about paraquat is we always say paraquat's a contact herbicide. It don't move. Well, that's not true. It doesn't move because it kills the tissue so quickly it can't move. If you put paraquat, let's just say you take a plant and you're growing it in a beaker of nutrient solution, and you put paraquat in there and you keep it in the dark, it'll run right up to the top. But if sunlight hits it, it kills it so quickly it can't translocate. So if I put paraquat on just before nightfall, I can actually get a little bit of movement in the plant before it starts killing the tissue the next day. So it may actually work better put out late at night.
So what would you think about an SU like that?
And SU's one that I don't know if there's enough data that we can say there is or is not a time of day impact. Same thing with blazers, for example. I don't know if anybody really knows.
Interesting.
All right, why do you guys need to avoid resistance as much as you can? Because it will cost you dearly once you get it. What has been some of the impact of this glyphosate-resistant palmer for us? Well, whoops, too many buttons here. One of them is we definitely have raised awareness among growers. It's surprising. I don't guess there's a grower in this state hasn't heard multiple things about resistant weeds. Surprisingly, how many growers in conversations mode of action will come up. Well, that's a PPO inhibitor. They know those things. What we have seen, though, is we've seen a 180-degree turn from where we were, in particular using residual herbicides. We're putting them on ahead of planting, we're putting them on behind the planter, we're putting them on post-emergence. As much as we dislike it, we have had to go back a little bit more to these things than we were. This one was one I never did think I would see in North Carolina. We used to hand weed tobacco because it was high value. We hand weed some vegetable crops. I never thought we'd see anybody hand weeding row crops. Well, we
used to
did.
do a lot of chipping, a lot of hand weeding.
We didn't, but we're doing it now. That's Palmer amaranth. This is a culpepper, and this young lady did a big survey in Georgia, and this is called this before Roundup Ready and before resistance and after. Very few growers were hand weeding, very limited amount of acres, and it didn't cost very much then. Almost all the growers are hand weeding at least some of their acres now, and it's costing a whole heap more. So it's been very expensive. Other big issue that has happened is we have seen a very significant shift to varieties that we can put glufosinate on. Initially it was the phytogen varieties, and then the last couple of years Stoneville has come in with some good agronomic performing varieties, and so we're seeing a big shift over to glufosinate tolerance. This has not happened much in North Carolina, but in Georgia it has. They have gone away from no-till, gone back to cultivating more. They're even doing bottom plowing, turning the land. Again, some Georgia data here, before and after Roundup resistance. What percent of the acres got a residual herbicide? You can tell they bumped it up big time. How much of the acres got hand weeded? Where was the conservation tillage? It went way down. Cultivation went way up. Bottom line is it has greatly increased the cost, and it's not simple anymore. It's increased the complexity. If we had not depended entirely on glyphosate, we could have probably in the long term, not spent as much money. But when we were using glyphosate only, it was cheap. Let's say it cost us $24 an acre. That was our weed control for the year. If we had just done a few things to try to be more proactive, a little bit of prevention, so maybe we'd have pulled up a few escapes, we'd probably put another residual herbicide out there, but we might have doubled our cost. But this is where many of our growers are now in terms of cost. We're putting on every herbicide we can think of. We're doing a lot of hand weeding, and $100 an acre. What would that be in hectares? It's what, 250 for hectares? Is not uncommon. Okay. Where are we on time?
You're
You
good.
got all the time you need.
You get all the time you need.
Let me make a few comments on the ryegrass situation then, since that's been our other biggie. And I think the ryegrass thing, maybe that's the harbinger of what we may see with pigweed. But the thing about the ryegrass is it's a situation where we have run out of tools. We don't have any more. It's our number one problem in wheat in North Carolina. It was 81 to 1983, somewhere along in there is when Holon or diclofop came on the market. Prior to that, we had nothing for ryegrass. People thought this was the best stuff they'd ever seen, and we used it like crazy. The southwestern part of North Carolina was traditionally wheat, double crop soybeans. That was it, every year. And so Holon, diclofop went on every year. Took us about 5 years and it quit working. High levels of resistance. That says 32 times the normal rate. The max you can put on is about 96 times the normal rate. and that's spraying it straight out of the jug, and it still won't kill it. We went into a period of using a product we call Finesse, which was a mixture of chlorsulfuron and metsulfuron, 2 ALS inhibitors. Basically a broadleaf herbicide, but it will suppress ryegrass. Well, when the diclofop quit working, we had nothing else, so we used a fair amount of this Finesse, even though it wasn't good. It helped us a little bit on the ryegrass. Had some issues with rotations. Inconsistent in performance. This is some of our data looking at control at the end of the year, and it went from terrible to good. On the average, not very good. Rainfall dependent. When did it rain versus when did the ryegrass come up? The other issue we had with it, most of our wheat is followed by double crop soybeans the same year. Finesse is tough on a soybean unless it carries to what we call the STS trait. 2003, if I remember correctly, is when the trade name for us was Osprey or mesosulfuron came on the market. Fantastic on ryegrass. Our people used it just as hard as they could use it. And I remember predicting when this thing came out that it was an ALS inhibitor, and I predicted we'll have resistance in 5 years. I was wrong. We got there in 3 years. But extremely good when it was working. And this is an average of control, 41 trials into the season, 95%. It don't get much better. But we did get resistance. And here's an example of susceptible versus resistant biotypes. A little bit later on, Dow came out with a PowerFlex or Pyroxalam, but it's also an ALS inhibitor. Had cross resistance between it and Osprey. There's an example of PowerFlex versus Osprey, and you got cross resistance. Axial, trade name for us. Penoxidin is the common name. It's also an ACCase inhibitor, the same as the diclofop was. You'd assume I may very well have cross resistance, and sometimes we do. The best we can get a handle on it, though, more times than not, if I've got resistance to diclofop, Axial still works. But we know there are cases of cross resistance. This is an underutilized